Do you want to get the most out of your team? Welcome to the JvR Ukwanda podcast, where people practitioners share leadership and business insights for managers. In this first two-part episode, Jopie de Beer talks about what it takes to be a successful manager, first covering some personal questions and then moving on to why people management is the hardest part of being a manager, some tips for getting the most out of your team, and the role that ambition plays in the transition from me to we. Thank you for listening to our podcast. Welcome to this first episode of this podcast series, where we're talking specifically to managers in Africa, and the goal is to interview people practitioners to hear what their lessons and what their insights are in terms of how to better manage people. Okay, so we've got Jopie de Beer here today. And Jopie, if you could be anyone in history, who would you choose and why?
I've often thought that Marie Curie is such an interesting role model because at a time where women were not actually seen as being interested in any academic achievements, she studied part-time, she hid away her interest in knowledge, and then became the first woman to actually win the Nobel Prize in 2 categories. She obtained a PhD, the first woman to obtain a PhD from a French university. But she did that at the same time whilst working with her husband, discovering polonium and radium, but having kids as well. So she's always stood out for me, definitely like all of us, not a person without flaws, but how at a very difficult time she was able to balance both the intellectual side or the academic side, the learning side, but also the family side. It's interesting, one of the quotes that's always stood out for me, well, 2 quotes. The one is she says, "Have no fear of perfection because you'll never reach it." So it's just sort of a wise statement to say, just relax, do the best you can, but don't always try to be perfect. And then in a very concrete way, people often asked her how she balanced family and work, and her answer was typically, well, it's not easy, which is, I think, very balanced and a woman to be admired.
That's interesting. Okay, so balance is important, achievement is important. Do you think it's difficult for women to manage this in the workplace?
I don't think anything has changed, and particularly difficult today, I think, for women is the fact that they want to achieve exactly like all other human beings. We all want to achieve. It's extremely difficult when you have responsibilities at home. For those who have support at home, it makes a big difference. But for many, there's not necessarily support at home. And the duality of the role of women is really not easy. I'm happy to see that many men are actually coming in, and the kind of partners that they're becoming is to participate in that duality. I think it makes it easier.
Cool. So if you could spend a week anywhere in the world, where would you go and what would you do?
I'd love to go to Ethiopia. I'd love to go and see all the sites and the rich history that they have in Ethiopia. But while I have the opportunity to dream, I'd like to go to the Netherlands as well. My roots are actually from the Netherlands, and I'd like, before I lay my head down, to be able to speak Dutch fluently.
Cool. If you had to choose another profession or another major, what would it be and why?
All the professions I considered early in life and even later in life has always been on the helping side, people helping side. So I was very interested early in my life in becoming a nurse. I was very interested, so the medical field. I was extremely interested in sociology and political science, but psychology has always been my passion.
Do you think that there's a helping people side inherent in the role or in the job of being a manager?
Absolutely. I think it's the most essential component, a reason why many managers find the role extremely difficult. I don't think you can manage without being competent, without not knowing having the knowledge for the job that you have to do. But managing most often is having to manage through people. And it's for many managers, the most difficult part in management is how to actually deal with people. Whether it involves difficult people, whether it involves ambitious people, whether it involves conflict, but that, I think, is the most difficult component in management and in leadership.
So what would you say, in your experience, what does it look like when you are having people problems? If you're a first-time manager and you might be thinking, this is difficult, or I'm struggling, I'm not getting to what my goals are. What are the signs or symptoms that it is in fact a people issue rather than a technical or procedural thing?
I'm going to answer that in two ways. The one is that some of the data we have is that 75% of people, I'm talking worldwide, actually report that their manager for them is the most difficult part of their everyday job. I take from that for the employee, not for the manager only, employees demand quite a bit in terms of the expectations for integrity, clarity in roles, instructions, profitability, whatever the expectation of the manager is. 75% of employees actually do not find the satisfaction from their manager that one would expect them to have. So from the manager's side, they're probably experiencing the same. That all they're trying to do is to keep the show on the road. The business needs to keep on functioning. It needs to be profitable. Their own ratings from leadership should be as positive as possible. That they have come to their managerial position because they are ambitious and good at what they're doing. But they may often have the sense that the people issues are taking a lot of time, is extremely difficult, is often irrational, that they are evaluated maybe unfairly, but that the people side of being a manager, they may even have the perception that it's holding them back.
So you're describing a very difficult position where you sort of sandwiched between two different conflicting goals. So on the one side, or expectations, on the one side you've got the organization that requires certain things yesterday, and on the other side you've got very real people issues, and sometimes I've heard people talk about, you've got the task focus and you've got the heart focus. Just talk to me about how do you prioritize, how do you balance those two lines? Because it's very different, those two lines of focus.
I think to your point that it's a difficult position to be a manager. On the one hand, it's a wonderful position. I mean, it's an acknowledgement that you've been promoted into a managerial position, and that should be celebrated. But once you start functioning and you take on the responsibilities of being a manager, the first thing that you need to do is to be very informed and knowledgeable about your own hardwiring. So some people would very naturally really prefer just to focus on the task at hand. So the job that needs to be done, the income that's generated, it's very much the bottom line. That's where their focus is. And all they want people to do is to do their work. Other people are much more inclined towards the people side. And their sense would be if people are engaged, if people are happy, if people are involved, they will be productive. And if they are productive, they will be successful, let's say as a department or as a company. Both of those positions are absolutely legitimate. You need to know where your natural inclination is, because if you know that it's either more towards the task side or towards the people side, or as you say, the heart side, if you know where your natural inclination is, you're also going to know where your potential pitfalls may be. So if your natural inclination is more towards the task side, you need to watch very carefully how you work with people. Because people do need acknowledgement. People do need to feel that they are respected, People do need to feel that they are considered. So if you are more a task-orientated person, chances are in your self-development you would need to really manage the people side of your management role. If you are more of a people-orientated person, your difficulties may lie in the fact that the strengths lie in the fact that you understand the people, you understand the team, you want to be close to the team, you want to guide the team in a direction where everybody feels involved. Your dilemma may be that you may be pulled into people issues to such an extent that you start feeling ambivalent about all my time is being absorbed by Sally that has recently divorced and Peter that is so ambitious but he doesn't have the money to pay for further education. You could become so absorbed in the people issues that you start becoming highly strained and stressed because you're not reaching the goals, the tasks that has been set or that you've set for yourself. So it really starts with understanding yourself really well and then managing where you may have blind spots or pitfalls going forward. Because the role of management asks you not only to be competent, it really asks you to be competent in a number of different ways. As you move more and more into a leadership position, it's asking you actually that your own ego is put aside, and now it is about people, tasks, communication, finances, strategy, implementation of strategy. So it becomes a more complex role that asks more of you as an individual. You may have moved into management because you're really competent at your job, but the work of a manager asks you more of a complex range of capabilities.
Okay. So, given that, you're moving into a next sort of level of abstraction almost, what is your mindset going in about people, the people that you work with, that work for you, that you report to? What is a good mindset or sort of view of the world that you need to adopt going into this position?
I'm going to be quite concrete about that. The fact that you're a manager means that you're a manager. It's a position of authority and leadership. It's a position of responsibility. We can't deny that. So the one thing is, I've often seen with young managers that there's a critical position where you can't be friends to the same extent maybe that you were before being promoted into a management position, because you're now in a position of more authority. Now with that, I'm not saying become unfriendly. One just needs to be careful that if you are really still the popular friend, sometimes that transition into having to take responsibility also for discipline, task, is extremely difficult. So another thing I've seen over time is that people sometimes feel, once I've got the title of manager, now I can do with people what I want. So it's a totally different perspective, that now you say, well, I'm in authority. When I say jump, you need to jump. That, of course, doesn't work either. The truth in management lies somewhere in the middle. That you are still regarded by the people that you manage, that they trust you, that they follow you willingly, that they want to strengthen your hand and work with you. So you need to be close enough that they understand why you're taking those responsibilities. But you cannot become the person that the title now becomes your ticket to actually abuse or be a bully or be so authoritarian that you disallow any of your employees any acknowledgement for good work that they don't. So to some extent in my head sometimes the manager is a facilitator, a leader and a facilitator to make sure that the job is done in the best possible way. And the best possible way says the job needs to be done. The job is often done through people, so you need to be skilled in how you work with people.
If you had to suggest 2 or 3 books, or perhaps one book, that you feel would be good for a new manager or any manager basically to read, do you have any suggestions?
Well, I'm going to give 2 options. The one that stands out for me, and it's interesting how it's not a new book anymore, but I'm hearing quite a bit of interest from a research perspective and people developing new theories, etc. But it's the book from Jim Collins, Good to Great. Its essence talks about how you work with people, how you are in a position of authority and responsibility, but how you work with people. And the bottom line there is this transition from it's not about you anymore, it's about us now. So you can't be, I think Collins uses the example of, you can't be looking into the mirror anymore, seeing how good you look. You now look out the window to see how people are happy around you, playing together or working together. So I would definitely, Good to Great for me is one of those absolute classics when you talk about the people side of leadership or management. The second thing I would say is there's a whole range of wonderful articles in the Harvard Business Review. Register, use it, read it. It provides you with many different views, some of which you may agree with or disagree with, but it really provides you with practical case studies, practical insight, different views. So I would, to a young manager, I would say register, read every single article that would be relevant to the work that you're doing.
You highlight a point that reminds me of research that we've recently done with Jack Hammer that talks about what differentiates executives from other staff. And the 2 main things that came out from that study was ambition and thirst for learning. Now, on ambition, becoming a manager, I think it's safe to assume that you would be fairly ambitious. What is the pros and the cons of this strong ambition in someone? What's some of the stuff that you need to be aware of about yourself?
It is a difficult one, and it does require a level of maturity. Early in life, you'll also find that in some theories about life stages and so on, but early in life, it's all about my ambition, how I need to work harder, how I need to be able to compete, how I need to be more visible than others, how I need to make sure that I've got more skills than others. So whatever form it takes, it's very much about me. There is, when you get to certain levels of responsibility, particularly around management, and as you move more towards executive positions, for people to build a sustainable business and for managers to be sustainable, it is really important that the focus on me becomes a focus on us. It's a maturity thing. It's the ability to temper your own ambition, because that need not disappear. Because as a manager, you probably have 10 additional stepping stones that you would like to build your own career on. But when it gets to an us, it's an understanding that to be absolutely successful, think of an organization. One person cannot make it successful. It's how we work together. It's a social network that actually works together to build that success. So a person who stays with my ambition is only about me would definitely at some point in time possibly plateau. Because the sense of the people around this manager or leader is it's really only about him or her. They don't care about us. So you're going to find possibly a plateauing of the career, where if the manager leader can make that maturity transition, it becomes about us. It does not mean that the manager has lost his or her own ambition, but they now include others in that ambition. Then I think there's real success. You want a person to be ambitious, because with ambition it says I've got high standards, I've got things that I want to achieve, I'm prepared to work hard to achieve that. So you want ambition, rather than somebody seeing management just as a tick list. I need to do 3 things every day, and that I do, and I do it adequately. That is not the kind of manager that will have buy-in from employees, and it's not the kind of manager that will keep on advancing in the hierarchy.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you have some ideas that you can share, or thoughts on? I mean, everything is getting so hectic and fast these days. At the same time, everyone's talking about the need for innovation and creativity, and in my mind, these two things are opposites of each other. It's very difficult to be creative and innovative when you are just struggling to keep your head above the water. What's your thoughts on managing that dilemma?
The first thing I would say is we need to be very careful. Some of your best managers are people who could work themselves to death. So they would work at all hours. They take their responsibility to such an extent that the work would actually negatively affect their health, their relationships, etc. Now, from a employer perspective, those are wonderful employees to have, because you can trust them. You know that they will implement, they will do what they promised. There just needs to be a balance there. It is actually also not fair that the person's life is affected to such an extent that they lose their health. So the wellness of the manager is critically important, and it's not always the employer's responsibility to look after the wellness only. The person has to look after his or her own wellness. Now, that does not mean to have balance in your working life and private life. Doesn't mean that I do 50% work, 50% relaxation. You can still work very hard, but you need to balance that with me time. If you love reading, you have to be able to read. If you love doing exercise, you have to be able to do exercise. If you love just playing with your kids, you have to have time for that. Because you know what is interesting? It's often during that time where you relax. For some people it's meditation, for some people it's prayer, for some people it is walking in nature. It's so interesting. If you are highly competent at your work, it's sometimes when you relax where the innovative thoughts pop up. So it's not just a question of feeling guilty, some would say, about I've got so much work to do, I actually have to just spend all my private time. It's actually really essential at this time that you've got time to quiet down, and then you'll see some innovative ideas may just pop into that space, which has another major benefit for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. In the next installment, Jopie talks about reputation and failure, emotional intelligence, and the role of self-insight as a manager. We also have an interview with Jonathan Cook coming up that shouldn't be missed. We would love to open up the floor to you. If you would like to share some of your own insights, please email me at hofmeyr@jvrafrica.co.za. That's HOFMEYR @jvrafrica.co.za.